Show business gets in the way of everything. Pregnancies, one of my, I could go through and tell you, like in one movie, here I only have 3 kids, and in this next scene I now have 4 kids because one was born, in between shooting one thing or another. Life gets in the way. I had worked, I had put my head down and plowed through an awful lot of great stuff. I'm certainly not complaining, but I knew that I was tired, and had in my head, a period of non-activity. But as is often the case, something comes along, and it's not. None of it is about business reasons. That's not what you work through. The fact is, I read the screenplay written by Todd, and I read it in 17 minutes, and I was infected with the bug of imagining the story. And once that happens, you're doomed. The only thing you can do is hope that it works out schedule-wise. And I talked to Clint, and we know each other enough in order to. The pleasantries didn't go on for very long, as I'd met him before, and he said, "Hi, where are you?" "I'm in a car." "Oh, where are you driving?" "I'm driving into L.A." "Oh, okay. Well, I'm in Budapest." "Hey, this is great." "Yeah, it is pretty great." When do you want to start?" "Well, I think we have to start in October because we need the Hudson River." "All right. Well, and then that's all it was. It was just the logistics in the calendar. Look, I've seen all the movies of Clint Eastwood, and the ones that are amazing are super amazing. Oh my gosh! I mean, you just run down. Let's say, and I know how movies are made. So when I see them and I see what Clint has done with a minimum amount of fuss, and at the same time with every cinematic trick that exists, it's quite astounding. Just from a fan of making movies. Then him as an actor. I mean, geez, he's got some pretty iconographic performances, films. That's one side of it. So fan and coworker. That's one aspect. The other side is I made a survey of people who had worked with Clint. Say, so what's the deal? Are the stories true? Do you only get one take? Do you not know sometimes when the camera's rolling? And they all said, and rightly so, it's like, there's not a lot of takes, but there's a lot of coverage, which means that you have 7, 8, 9, maybe even more opportunities to do what you want to do in a scene. And to back that up, leaving this, I never felt as though we left something on the table by the time that we were shooting it. And sometimes just the opposite. I felt as though because he moved so fast, we were able to go on and find other aspects of the scenes that only came out because we had big momentum going with us. You don't want to screw up somebody's life, for one thing, and I do not ever want to project upon them some editorial aspect of their behavior. They behaved as they behaved. What happened to them happened, and the results are completely objective to themselves. They're subjective to themselves. I want to be authentic to all those things. I want to be accurate to all those things, even though in a movie I will say things I never said and be places they never did. I will be interpreting moments that are nothing like what actually happened. But I want to do all those armed with as much authenticity as possible. Part of that is, with a guy like Sully, he walked me through the script. He had a big dog-eared, notated version of one of the early drafts, and he was going through it, even scenes I'm not in, because I know you're not in this, Tom, but I want you to know, as though it was the Gutenberg Bible. And on one hand, I said, look, that's easy to change, Sully. We can change these names, and any verbiage in there can be altered. But what's the other aspect of it? What is the stuff in here that is editorial, or what's the word I'm looking for? Is it objective, or it's objective moment examination of what went on? That's the stuff that's more important. Now, oddly enough, there was procedure that was in the screenplay that by altering it became more emotionally authentic to what went on. There were other things to it that were just slapped in for the sake of it. Like, for example, Jeff Skiles has never had a drink in his life. And there was an early draft of the screenplay, and they said, do you drink? He said, oh, I haven't had a drink for 8 yeyears, meaning that he had been an alcoholic and then was out. No, he didn't. So he was like, you can't say that Skiles was ever. And I said, well, then it's out. And he goes, oh, all right. So knowing how it works and knowing what we're going to have to do sooner or later, I felt that was my job in order to weigh the differences in between with him and himself. And there was some stuff I said, well, you might have to fight with Clint on that, or I don't know how key that is to what Todd wrote. But by and large, all of it was in order to get to this place in the film, in the relationship that I had with Sully, me and him, is what I wanted. I wanted the jungle drums to be beating. I wanted to hear the same drums that he heard. And whether or not we did that or not is open to interpretation. But between his book, you'd have to ask him, how authentic. I don't know if we did everything exactly perfectly, but the big aspect, because his book does not have the period of time of waiting for the NTSB hearing or the results of it. And I said, why isn't it in the book? And he said, because it hadn't happened yet. He had written the book before that happened. So finding out about the pressure of that, this could have been a screenplay in which that was truly fake and just, ratcheted up because you got to make a movie about it. And it turned out to be the opposite. It was actually much more emotional for Sully, the 18 months that he spent. The only thing we did is we compressed it so you don't really know how much time went between the two. But that ended up being even more so than what Todd wrote. But the good news about that is that you carry that around inside your head. It's not something that you don't place placards right next to it. You just do it. My philosophy is because of what didn't happen. We had gone through 9/11. The last thing the world needed to see, and the last thing New York City wanted to experience, was a bunch of dead people against the skyline of New York City. They did not to see more wreckage, more flames on the water. They did not want to experience a moment where, guess what? Everything fell apart one more time. The opposite happened, which on one hand is something to celebrate, but the bullet dodged, I think, is why it has this emotional resonance. Can you imagine what the next 10 days would have been like in New York City, with the river right there, with the bodies that would have been pulled out of the water, and all of the story. The New York Times would have run that same story of all the little pictures of all the people who have been lost, and in that picture you would have seen some sense of what America is, the different fabric, regular ordinary lives of people in New York and Charlotte, North Carolina, the crew. You would have seen all that again, and it would have been a massive long moment of national mourning. And instead what happened was our institutions proved worthwhile, the people who were prepared and who's or the professionals that did it actually did their job, and guess what? We all survived what seemed to be an act of God by way of a flock of Canadian geese, flying. Now, I think that's why it's so. You could celebrate what Sully did and his instincts and all that stuff by all means. But I think the resonance that I felt, this is what I felt when I first read the screenplay, because it had even more moments in it of people who were in New York City who were looking out, and what they were seeing? Another low-flying passenger airplane, coming in at the level of the buildings of New York City. No one wanted to see that. No one wanted to see that again. And they did, and it turned out to be one of the best news stories of the decade. So I think that's what it